Well, my name is David Prescott. I have my funky title is Director of Acquisitions and Training at Safer Societies. So, welcome to this webinar today. It's great that you can join us, and thanks for putting into the chat where you're from. I see a question about where do I sign, and I think actually you just did. Welcome aboard, everybody that's here. Our topic today is manhood, masculinity, and treatment for sexual offending. A conversation with my good friend Alejandro Leguizamo, and whose name I probably practiced pronouncing about 10 times today to make sure that I had it right. So anyway, let's get started. It's just wonderful to see where everybody's coming in from. So welcome aboard. Okay, we're really glad that you're here. We know that everybody is super busy, so we're going to get right into it. I see that somebody has raised their hand, and I'm going to get into the ways that we can best participate here. Moose Lake, Minnesota, my old stomping ground. So I just want to start a little bit. Welcome to Safer Society. If you haven't met us before, we are a nonprofit dedicated to providing services and resources for preventive and restorative responses to sexual and social violence. We've been around since around 1982, and we were founded by this woman here. Her name is Faye Honey Knopp, someone who is beloved to all of us. Instead of just thinking outside the box, Faye Honey, as she was known, used to say she would just as soon blow the box up if she had the opportunity. So she was quite a bold reformer and a charismatic individual. Nowadays, we have Mary Falcon, who you see here as our executive director at the helm. We've got Steve Zioli, our marketing director, who makes many of our operations smooth and seamless. And my partner in all of this behind the camera is Sarah Snow Haskell. Thank you to all of them, and of course to you for joining us today. Together, we all believe that knowledge grows when it's shared. This is why we do things like publish a magazine for professionals working with at-risk children and teens. It's called the New Circle magazine. And we also have any number of other webinars coming up. We've got lots of things that we've just added to the roster in the past few days. All right, Grants Pass, Oregon. Great to have you here. On Tuesday, this one should be a really special event. On Tuesday, we've got a conversation with Fritzi Horstman and the Compassion Prison Project. You might know Fritzi Horstman. She directed the documentary called Step Inside the Circle, which is really worth a Google search if you haven't seen it. And she'll be coming to talk with me about trauma and the prison system in general and her documentaries about them. We've also got Katie Gotch and Kathy Gomez coming in to talk about human trafficking and sexual offending. We have all of the trainings that you see here on the right, all kinds of things coming up in the very near future, including Liam Marshall doing a return on working with individuals who are in denial. Lots of other things that you see here. And then as of just a few minutes ago, happy to announce Jill Levinson will be back to do a workshop on trauma impact and self-care. April Alexander will be joining us in September on the topic of cultural humility in correctional assessment and treatment. And we've also got Stephen Andrew, who will be doing motivational interviewing in cases involving domestic violence or intimate partner violence. If you don't know Stephen, he is, in my opinion, one of the three best motivational interviewing trainers in the whole world, with only one of the others even residing in the US. So he's really just an amazing person. Okay, what you can expect during the next hour, the first half is a conversation, Alejandro and I, and then the second half will be audience questions via chat and Q&A. So use your chat and Q&A functions. And then when it's all over, please do. Oh, I see we have a Stephen Andrew fan. This is great. So welcome aboard. It's great, great to have you here. Please do give us feedback after all of this is over via the survey that you get in your email. That would be great. So how it works, please use the chat and Q&A features at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Don't use the raise hand feature if you don't have to, because I can only attend to so many things at once, and I really do the best that I can to get every question answered. Remember that the intended audience is professional, so please do understand the information and commentary in the spirit in which it's intended, and don't forget that time is short. So if we could keep comments and questions directly related to the topic, I would appreciate that very much. So welcome aboard. And on that note, I'm just really grateful to Alejandro for joining us today. And Alejandro, I think you are coming to us from Rhode Island. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Very good. Hey, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
What the audience might not know is that you've actually been part of the Safer Society Dream Team behind the scenes, working on translations into Spanish of many of our books. And you and I have actually gotten to do some training on those books for audiences in South America, which is super cool. So anyway, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah. So the topic, manhood, masculinity, and the treatment of people who have sexually offended. I guess I'd just like to start at the beginning and ask, so in your view, what is masculinity and why should we even be thinking about it?
Okay. Given the time constraint, this is going to be very difficult. I tend to digress a lot and tell lots of stories, and I'm not going to be able to do that. Yeah, not in half an hour. So I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible, and hopefully that won't be dry. So I would like to say the caveat, given that we have colleagues from literally all around the world, to think about what we are going to talk about, to think about it as how it may apply in your society, because every society is going to have different flavors of these kind of like patriarchal issues. So keep that in mind as I'm talking, because this is more conceptualized towards kind of like the North American society and perhaps some Latin American societies, sort of. So keep that in mind. So researchers, writers, particularly in sociology, kind of like differentiate. The reason why I'm interested in this, first of all, is that I'm interested in kind of like the background issues of sexual aggression. So as a psychologist, I was trained on the individual, right? It's individual pathology, you treat the individual, that's it. And social workers are a lot better at kind of looking at more systemic issues. But more recently, I have become interested in more cultural issues that kind of like set the stage for everything else that takes place. And sexual aggression happens within that context of a patriarchal, male-oriented, at the very best, benignly misogynistic society where there are a lot of issues of power and control, okay? So masculinity is seen by sociologists, interestingly, not as something that we are, but something that we do. In being, we are all very, very similar. We experience the same emotions. We have the same potentials. Physically, so sure, there are some differences, but they're not that great. But what differentiates us are the societal taught ways of behaving. So manhood then becomes not how we are, but basically what we do. And what we do is learn by the society that we're in.
Fantastic. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. You've used the phrase benignly misogynistic. It really captures my imagination. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Okay, I hope so, since I just like came up with that right now.
Oh.
But basically, is that there are very, 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 very few societies that are truly egalitarian and when there's equity. And those societies tend to be led by women and tend to be matriarchal societies. And they're at this point kind of like tribal societies as opposed to a country. Like we can say like, sure, Scandinavia, you know, they're a lot further ahead from than us on gender equality. This is what I hear. Our colleagues from Scandinavia may say like, oh, you don't know. I might not know, but they seem to be further ahead. But there's still no society where there's true equality or equity. So even in the best of circumstances, there's still maybe that kind of like emphasis on the male, or some preference for the male, or the language is based on the male. And those are little things that that kind of like cue us into this kind of like benign misogynism.
Yeah. Realizing that this is a topic that people can and do spend day after day trying to come to terms with. I appreciate the kind of view from 35,000 feet. And as you said, it exists in different cultures in various forms. I'm particularly interested too in terms of what kinds of messages societies get about masculinity, particularly in this era with so much in the media, including social media. Your thoughts on that?
We tend to get plenty of messages from very close to us, from our parents, or of what is okay behavior for a child. You can, here in the US, you go to the clothing store and you see the boy section and the girl section. The girl section is all pink and soft, and the boy section is full of camouflage because they're gonna go on missions in the backyard. Or even like I've seen outfits for baby boys, like saying, you know, heartbreaker for a little boy. It's like, okay, do we have to sexualize like infants? I mean, we know our clients do it, and that's problematic. But as a society, we do it as well. Yeah. Also, more importantly, the different sets of limits that we put on the behavior of children, so that boys in particular are not are allowed less of an emotional expression than girls. And emotional expression is going to vary from society to society, from societies that are very open and expressive and others that are a lot more reserved. But in all of them, there's more limits to the vulnerability that a male can exhibit. So, you know, we see it even now. A woman that is assertive is perceived as aggressive or as nasty or bossy, whereas a boy that exhibits the same behavior is seen as a leader. Or the boy that is ostracized because they show weakness, or, you know, cries or shows vulnerability. So those messages are very much ingrained. Look at the movies, look at what men and women, how they're portrayed in the movies. The movies that are popular, the men are very muscular. They have an arsenal of weapons in their homes or nearby. And there are very few images in the media of men who are more family-oriented, more vulnerable, that express emotions more openly.
Wow. So several places that we could go from there, but one of the things that really strikes me is when young men are getting all these messages about being tough or being violent or learning things from their parents. What are the implications for sexual violence of things that we learn from our parents or that our clients have learned from their parents?
I think that it goes back to the issue of power and control. We are expected to be in control at all times. We cannot, you know, It's kind of like men asking for directions. It's like, oh, you can ask for directions. You should know where you're going. It's like, no, you need to like accept that you don't know what you're doing. Or so there's that issue that we have to be in control and that we have to be powerful. So from the beginning with dating, one needs to have a prowess in conquering, or even the conquering, even the word like, oh, we have to conquer women, like romantically. That's the benign misogynism I was talking about. How this power and this control leads to circumstances where there is going to be a reaction to the perceived or actual loss of that power or that control. That leads to sexual aggression, where the man then feels that they need to aggress sexually, either because they feel entitled to that sexual activity, or they are reacting to a rejection, or they are reacting to another type of loss of power. So, and that runs the gamut from the man in college that convinces their girlfriend to have sex, and the young woman cries throughout the event. I had a couple of friends like that in college, all the way to the severe assaults that we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Again, so many layers to this. I also just want to point out Wendy's comment that women who express a view are sometimes referred to as opinionated.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, no question about that. And so I guess I also wonder about the messages to boys from parents of at least those boys who go on to become truly sexually abusive. I just it leads me to questions of if a portion of this behavior is something that resulted from lessons learned at home, trauma, and other adverse experiences, etc. I guess the best way I can express it, and I wonder what your thoughts are, Alejandro, the best way I can express it is from the title of an article by James Revis and Jan Lohman and their colleagues, which asks, how long do we have to live before we truly own our own lives? And I wonder about the inheritance of attitudes tolerant of sexual abuse that our clients may be getting. Any thoughts?
Depending on it's hard to tease out the kind of like men who are convicted of sex offenses specifically versus all the men who engage in sexual aggression. So I think that for the ones that end up convicted, there's usually other things going on. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot more antisocial tendencies, psychopathic tendencies. There is abuse, there is neglect. For a more general kind of like sexual aggression that goes unnoticed or goes underreported, might be the socialization of being I'm trying to not say conquest, but kind of like the parent that celebrates the son going on many dates. Whereas, so the difference between the boys and the girls, the boy being expected to have lots of experience and the girl perhaps not expected not to have as much experience. So we have those messages from the home, but also from outside of the home.
Yeah, thank you. And again, Alejandro, so many things that you're saying in all of this. You also referred to this loss of power and control, or this perceived loss of power and control. And I'm trying to get a better handle on how that also results in sexual violence. Can you, for some of our folks who aren't working directly with this clientele, your thoughts on that?
It can be related to the perception the ones not living up to their manhood, masculine expectations. And perhaps that may be the factor at play with some of the types of sexual aggression. For the ones that we tend to see, it can be the issue of feeling powerless in connecting to others, perhaps in regards to the social problems of like pedophilically interested men. So if they can't connect with an adult, they go to somebody where they don't feel, either they feel more powerful with, or they feel less powerless with. And the rapist, who is very much, it's an expression of power and control.
Right. So there's big expressions of power and control through outright violence. There's also the smaller examples of feeling powerless, as you said, within relationships, feeling powerless in terms of self-efficacy, powerless in terms of how they fit into the community, or maybe how they fit into the world around them, or maybe feeling powerless in terms of how they fit into their own gender.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have issues also here, issues of culture, based of ethnicity, based on socioeconomic status. We're going under the umbrella of European-based patriarchy, and that is where the power is held by white, male, heterosexual, Christian, and wealthy. And those who do not fit that really unrealistic expectation need to do something to compensate for that. So any type of ethnic minority, sexual minority, women, there are a disadvantage in this system. So there has to be some sort of compensatory behavior. So right off the bat, for example, here in the States, ethnic minority men have the problem of having to compensate for not being white, in a sense, and then having to deal with the portrayals of what is expected in regards to their behavior.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm seeing any number of wonderful questions coming in, and already looking at the time. Before we move into a broader discussion, can I just ask, men have such a reputation for not expressing emotions or not being emotive. And sometimes that can be a real paradox for us. Do you have thoughts about where that reputation comes from?
Of not being able to express emotions?
Yeah.
Well, that's because we're not allowed to. So kind of like in some of the readings that I have done, somebody wrote like the best way to like get a bunch of boys to like fight in a playground is to tell one of them that he throws like a girl. So any kind of like we have to go under the basis that, as far as I see it, I could be wrong, people may disagree with me, that men, we are extremely vulnerable in the sense that we are very fragile. So any question as to whether we are not male enough or man enough or something like that, and we go bonkers, because we are like a dandelion in the wind, very, very fragile. So any type of like message that questions our masculinity leads to a very strong response because of the implication of being more within the feminine. And there's a long history of this throughout the ages of like masculinity being in crisis, when men become more allowed to be more stereotypically feminine, or when women and minorities get more power. So, 1700s, men with makeup, oh crap, no, that's not cool. So then we have the 1800s, we get the civil rights movement, the women's liberation movement in the 60s and 70s, and we get the backlash starting with Reagan. We go from the gentle Carter to the movie star who was a cowboy. And we are still living that backlash from the civil rights movement and the women's liberation. And the backlash gets stronger because there's also the counter movement, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement.
Yeah, and of course, just in case it came off as controversial, whatever a president like Reagan's other qualities, you're referring to specific elements of his presentation and the society in which he existed, of course. So excellent. You know, sort of along these lines, what are your thoughts on homophobia and this? You know, along with being told men throw like a girl, any fear of being called gay?
Well, that goes with the history of my nice profession and eugenics, where they paired together and determined that homosexuality was a mental illness. And that's where the problems arose here in the US. You can see photos from the 1800s in the United States, and you see men being physically affectionate with one another. There used to be stag parties where minors would dance with one another. There were no women around. But then psychology came around and eugenics, and oh my God, no, homosexuality is a mental illness. And that all went out the drain. So we have other cultures where men are able to be more affectionate with one another. Weirdly enough, I'm from Mexico and I come from a fairly misogynistic society, but among men, there is more. When I greet my friends in Mexico, I say goodbye like, you know, I'm sending you a strong hug. And if you see soccer players, they kiss each other on the cheek when they like leave the field. And so the emotional connection is higher in other cultures than we have here in the US. And it's actually killing us, but that's for another conversation.
I'll be sure. Yeah, I'll have you back. I've already told you that I intend to. So, you know, I honestly hadn't thought of homophobia as a situation that has become more exacerbated, although the DSM certainly didn't do us any favors back in those days. And for folks outside the US, I'm referring to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, where homosexuality, so-called, was defined as a mental illness. I guess along the same lines as what you were just talking about, how have things changed in terms of being a straight male?
I think I like to actually also eventually give some suggestions more specific that folks can perhaps think about using in their daily work.
Yes, please.
But there is hope. The writers have been noting a change with Gen Z, or the people that are kind of like teenagers, young teenagers, and younger. And they are an interesting generation. They're a lot more open to diversity. They're a lot more open to gender expression, to sexual orientation, and they are a lot more comfortable with continua with regards to these issues. So in my generation, I'm Gen Xer, there's the male, female, that's it. There's gay and straight, bisexual, that's it. And now we have a lot more nuance. So I have a 13-year-old daughter, and her friends describe themselves as, they're not straight. What does that mean? So, I think I'm woke, and I tell my daughter, so do they identify as queer? And she looks at me all like mad, like a 13-year-old does, and goes, no, they're just not straight. They don't know what they are yet, but they're not straight. Like, all right. So they're a lot more comfortable, and there is more freedom depending on the social groups for a little bit more flexibility in the behavior. In her school, there's still the young boys that are kind of like doing the traditional boy things that the hell out of me, and I wish they would stop, but it's getting a little bit better and better. Should I turn it into some
Yes,
suggestions?
it was my last
Okay.
question is, let's talk
Okay.
about how does this fit into treatment?
Okay. This is something that this is not based on research, so take it with a grain of salt. If you have clients that you're able to treat long-term, which, if you're in a correctional setting, you have that luxury. Many times if they're court-ordered, you might have that luxury as well. You might as well kind of like spice things up with like, okay, let's not talk about your offense today or something else. Let's talk about, how do you become a man? What messages do you get growing up? What does it mean for you to be a man? And try to see try to assess what kind of like patterns come out. And those are culture specific. The Maori in New Zealand are going to have a little different nuances than white New Zealanders, or the same thing here in the US. From Native American nations to Latinos, and depending where in Latin America and African American, there's going to be different nuances. And I would encourage you to allow the men to talk about, I don't think that we do enough of talking to our clients about who they are and how they got to be the way that they are. So talking about what it means for them to be male, what messages, how these issues of power played out in their lives, and how I don't want to sound like, okay, they should feel like victims because society limited them. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm trying to get at is to try to help them develop a critical consciousness or critical awareness of, okay, these are the influences of how I got to be the way that I am. And these are the ways that it worked well, and these are the ways that it worked against me and led me to this offense. And then perhaps then there could be a dialogue about how they can go about fulfilling what they see as being their manhood in a way that is pro-social and doesn't hurt anybody else. I'm not going to say the word that I usually say, but ultimately, kind of like the message is, okay, you can be a man, just don't be a jerk. Okay, it's kind of like the very simple espresso of the message on masculinity. Kind of like, you can go out and have a healthy sexuality, just make sure that the person is adult, can consent, and nobody's getting hurt. That's kind of like the bare minimum. Same thing here. However, one thing that I have been struggling with in thinking is we have to help the men develop a way of being that works for them and with their values, so that, and to allow for that variability within them, so that the goal shouldn't be for all of our men to be a particular way or behave a particular way, but rather for them to develop their own definition of themselves that is more pro-social, and where they can get, let's say, feelings of power or feelings of mastery in ways that are different from what they did before.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm about to come over to audience questions and comments. My only thought as you were saying that is, oh boy, for some treatment professionals, it's also going to involve some grief counseling. As people really explore their ideals of masculinity and how they have or haven't sized up to them. So I see a lot of questions and a lot of comments. I just wanted to start back at the beginning, hoping that you might cover any links between masculinity, sexual offending, and substance use disorders. Any thoughts in that direction?
Well, that question really upsets me, but I'm not going to show it. So after this, I'm going to have a few beers in order to cope with it. So that kind of like sums it up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
absolutely. We tend to use substances in order to regulate our emotions, because it's kind of funny. Acting like a drunken fool or puking all over ourselves is still more acceptable than being vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
How sad is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. For those of you that haven't seen Brené Brown's TED Talk on what was it on shame, she has the story of a guy that says that she hadn't adequately described it with men, and that as far as he was concerned, his wife and family would rather see him shot out of the saddle than to fall from it.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So a comment here. I spoke with to a very young senator last Friday. So a person in public office. Boy, they haven't had such a great reputation in this area recently. He said that his mother taught him about masculinity when he was a first-year high school student. If a girl in his bed, clothed, unclothed, or if they are actually in the throes of foreplay or further, when the girl says no, he stops. Great parenting message. Unfortunately, not enough gets done in this way. Someone else, when I think of images of powerful men with little weakness in the media, the first place my mind goes is the characters in many of the recent superhero films, many of whom are largely decent people. Do you think trying to turn these from negative influences into positive ones is helpful, since it's basically all we have? Good question.
That is an interesting question. I think that anything that conveys more complexity. So if we have a superhero that can be vulnerable, that screws up, that is accountable for it, I think that's great, as long as we also have. It depends what we mean by heroes. Because we could have the Avengers, and okay, they're like superheroes, and they can make fun of themselves and all of that, and that's awesome. But we also should have like other heroes, like Roberto Benigni in Life is Beautiful, where he goes to really extreme lengths to protect his son from the Holocaust. I mean, he doesn't wear a cape. He wears a headscarf at one point, but that's a hero. And it's just how we defined it.
Yes, thank you. I'm seeing more messages than I can get to, but I'm going to try. Ken has a really, really interesting observation. Ken, from down under. How much violence against women is competition amongst men?
I think that for some groups, that hits the nail on the head, particularly groups like here in the US, fraternities, sports teams, where people are going to egg one another into engaging in as much sexual activity as possible. Then that's going to really foster that aggressiveness and that sexual aggression. So that can be a factor, certainly.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Here's another one. I'm going to do these in somewhat scattershot order, but I love this question. How could women better understand masculinity in terms of engaging in a relationship with them, whether professionally, intimately, or in a platonic manner? Thank you for that question. That's excellent.
I'm trying to think what my wife would say. Expect a hell of a lot more, and for our boys to be allowed to experience everything, feel vulnerable, be accountable, and see strong role models, regardless of the gender or sex. But it's the higher expectation. I gotta tell you, it's hard to be more encompassing. What I'm getting at is let's put it this way. My wife does more than I do at home. I hate to admit it, but it's true. And, do I contribute? Yes, I contribute. Could I contribute a lot more? Absolutely. But right now, her mother has been ill, so she has had to take on a lot more. And basically, she looked at me and she said, "Okay, you're going to need to do this, 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 and that." And I'm like, "All right." And it is hard work, but I think that we need to expect more. I mean, we have this vision even in commercials about men not being able to clean, or they make a mess and it has to be done again, and that's not really, we can be expected to do more.
Yeah.
And I think that will help.
Yeah. Thank you. Along with so many of the mixed messages about you're supposed to express emotions, but at the same time as you're not. Another really interesting comment here. I think that machismo, or toxic masculinity, is often rewarded by potential romantic partners because it comes across as being able to provide safety and survival potential to the family unit.
Oh man, we got the evolutionary person in the group. Oh,
Alvarado,
okay.
thank you for that.
At this point, come on. Maybe 2,000 years ago, but I mean, at this point, let me put it the other way. So that would argue that the James Dean character is going to be more popular because they're going to be seen as strong, able to protect the family. However, that archetype is the same one that rides a motorcycle without a helmet at 100 miles an hour, therefore increasing the chances of fatal accidents that would be counterproductive to the protection of the family. How's that?
Nice, excellent. Shannon also has just a wonderful question, right on point. How important is it to have both males and females in treatment and preventive settings?
Absolutely. Okay, I may say something controversial here, but I'm going to say it anyway. When we're doing treatment, we are in many ways reparenting the individuals that we work with, and it is not a bad thing to have as much diversity in the treatment providers in order to provide as rich as experience to the men in the group. So that's not to say that if there's only one gender that will be okay. I mean, it will be okay, but having both male and females are very, very important. Also to provide role modeling, so that the men that are providing, if a male therapist is modeling appropriate vulnerability in the group, that is going to be worth gold to the men who are going to feel that they're able to do that because they're not going to be judged by the men.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm just watching as 33 new messages have come in. And I'm going to say, folks, if I don't get to it, please feel free to contact me at davidprescott@safersociety.org. And I'll be happy to, because I suspect some questions are really important, and perhaps we can discuss them. An anonymous attendee asks, how does the criminal justice system or incarceration involvement impact these cultural messages sent to men?
They concentrate them in every way possible, from the prison authorities to the correctional officers to the men themselves, with the perhaps possible exception of Norway. If the videos that I have seen are true, then all prisons should be like Norway's. Yeah. Where people are treated humanely, where people are, there is rehabilitation as opposed to just incarceration and this concentration of pathology. So I tell anybody that will listen, if you plan to, and myself, if I ever plan to commit a crime, it's going to be in Norway.
Yeah, very true. And interestingly, you're the second person I've spoken to about the excellence of services in Norway. And I'm proud to say we have somebody who's done a very great deal to advance clinical services across Norway. So, but I'm not going to mention her name, Ingeborg. So,
Oh,
okay.
oh,
And okay, so
or agreed. Okay.
yes, yes, yes. So thank you, Ingeborg. And okay, so oh, Irina, well, welcome back. I haven't seen you in a long time. There's a lot of discussion about toxic masculinity and the need to change to new, more positive masculinities. Do you think we can say the same thing about toxic femininity?
Okay. I would encourage everybody to change that to hegemonic masculinity.
Okay.
Hegemonic is the masculinity based in patriarchy that posits that men are superior to women and that women are subservient. So not only less than, but also subservient. That encompasses more than that, this kind of like what toxic masculinity could entail, because that's kind of like the baseline in our patriarchal based societies. So there's a continuum of how negative it can be, but that is the message, you know. There's a reason why in the US we haven't had a female president. We're inching towards it, but there's a reason for that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, what was the? I got lost. What was the comment?
I've scrolled up,
Oh,
so we can come back to it because you're gonna.
I got it.
Yes.
I got it. So sociologists have coined different terms to a more positive masculinity, kind of like responsible masculinity or transformative masculinity, where the goal is for humans to not have gender in a sense, so that we all can have the full range of emotional expression, the full range of behaviors. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but this responsible masculinity or transformative masculinity is a masculinity that is more equitable, that there is more of a range of potential behaviors. For example, the stay-at-home dad, who frames their gender or their contribution to the household by keeping the household, as opposed to kind of like being the breadwinner. So redefining it so that we can come out of this this kind of like power and control dynamic. And mind you, I am also conscious that this is a very kind of like upper middle class white ideal that, you know, how would I, you will have to have very deep conversations with somebody, say from a dangerous neighborhood where, you know, where things are going to be different, and they're going to have to come up with a different conclusion, perhaps, about how they should be in a way that is healthy and pro-social and not it doesn't aggress against other people. Now, I don't know what toxic femininity might be. I can tell you that feminism, as I understand it, being a man that is not very well read on feminism, is that there should be equity and opportunity, and it's about choice. So a woman should be able to have the choice to do whatever they want, whether that's work, home, a combination. So with men. So I think that perhaps there's going to be a continuum, so that there's women, although I don't see any demonstrations of women with like weapons trying to say, you know, death to men. There might be, but I don't know.
Okay. By the way, Alejandro, your screen froze. If you want to turn off your camera and turn it back on again, that might help. I am seeing one comment that I'm going to have to address very briefly, which is just wondering if you guys are going to acknowledge any of the toxic masculinity in the chat. It seems like some folks are getting triggered. It's disheartening to see professionals still making excuses. And I confess I haven't been able to see all of the chat. I know that some of the commentary that I've brought forward has actually come from women, or at least names that I assume to be women. So if there is, I guess I want to apologize if there, I realize with this many people, and there are hundreds of people on this webinar, and hundreds more who are planning to watch it. I want to acknowledge that this is a topic that brings about pain and hurt in a lot of different ways. And I regret that I can't offer a more meaningful apology or sense of regret for any of the myriad of ways that I could see some of these comments coming off. But I know that it can, and unfortunately, with the short period of time that we do have, I'm going to try to stick to many of the questions, but I do appreciate the reflection on this. One comment that I see, thank you, Christine, is there is a time for crying, is the message that got lost in the younger generations. It was shortened to simply don't cry, which I think is really, really well done. Andy, who I was hoping might be on the call, I was thinking about you out there in Montana, Andy. How do you understand the part that women play in male toxicity when more women voted for our last president? Ooh, okay. I want to be cautious about this and see if we can keep it to.
I can address that.
Please.
Without getting into politics.
Sure, thank you.
In the patriarchy, there is going to be a move towards keeping the status quo, and that is going to mean men reinforcing the patriarchy, as well as women reinforcing the patriarchy as well, in order to what will be the I don't want to say collude, but kind of like to gain acceptance through the through their involvement in the status quo in the system. Okay, so certainly there is also, let's not forget that women are also socialized into what men and women and should behave like in the traditional gender dichotomy. So there's that status quo is going to come from all fronts as well. So that is a very, very good comment, because that's also going to be there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks very much. You had a question about what was the alternate name for toxic masculinity, and I wrote into the chat hegemonic masculinity. I assumed. Okay, thanks. Thank you for that. And Wendy is commenting on cognitive dissonance, perhaps as well, of which there is quite a bit. Here's an interesting question too. How do you fight masculine, or I assume hegemonic or toxic masculinity without being a feminist?
I don't know if you can.
I don't know if you can either.
Feminism has gotten such a bad rap. And again, I'll remind you what I said before about the backlash that we are still encountering based on the women's liberation movement. And even with college students right now, like in my classes, I ask them, who here is a feminist? And, I may get a couple of people like, raise their hands, and everybody else kind of like cowers down because of this, the narrative about feminists being, the bra burning, male hating or whatever, which is actually not it. Again, is the issue of having equity in society, but that is threatening to male power, because that means the sharing of the power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Very good. And yes, I could go in a lot of different directions there. I'm just going to scroll down and look at a couple of other things. I think anything out of balance struggles. There's always balance in life. Hannah's offering, I'd recommend further reading on topics such as comfet, or compulsory heterosexuality, where straight patriarchal values are values and assumed, which I agree with. Andy earlier asked about returning to masculinity and its connection to the treatment of people who've abused. Any good research papers that you might recommend, or is that is that better answered in an email?
Anything by Malamuth and the various developments of the confluence model.
Yes.
They're not looking at convicted sex offenders. They're looking at, they have looked at community men in general. And every piece has, the model keeps on getting more and more complex. And there are at least 1 or 2 articles that include culture, and by the Sioux brothers out in California with Asian Americans, with both contributing factors and protective factors. So if for Asian American males that could engage, have the potential for sexual aggression, that potential comes from feeling that their status is being challenged. However, the protected factor is if they are at risk of losing face if their behavior came to light. And the social cost is enough to prevent them from sexual aggression. Mm-hmm. And actually, there are a number of cultures, Native American cultures, that the loss for engaging in sexual aggression was so high that prevented men from engaging in it. Mm-hmm. And I just have to say this, and others like the Illinois, a particular tribe in the middle of the US, there was no concept of sexual aggression. When the European Americans during the expansion encountered the Iroquois, there was a colonel that in his writing even commented that that these people didn't even rape their prisoners. And in dismay that why wouldn't they do that? By the way, wars are very patriarchal, and sexual aggression, until there are no wars, there will still be sexual aggression, but that's a different thing. But for the Iroquois, it was like so out of their conception of anything that anybody, it's like if somebody came to you and told you, well, last time that you made pancakes, you didn't put them on your head as a hat, you would go, no, that didn't even enter my universe. It was the same thing for the Iroquois.
Sure. Thank you. And I did get a request. By the way, I've typed into the chat Neil Malamuth and the confluence model, as well as the Sioux brother, who I remember the best, Daryl Wing Sioux, who's just an amazing presenter. And I got asked also just to privately talk about some of the labels that we use. And I suspect that some of the disagreement that we might have seen in the chat also has to do with how we apply labels to individuals as well. And that there's been a massive trend in our field anyway to talk about not just, for example, sex offenders, a term I no longer use, but rather individuals who've sexually abused, and to recognize also that there are human beings beyond the labels that we might apply to others. So on that, Alejandro, we've got 1 minute to go. Any last words you would like to say?
Oh, that was very eloquent. I encourage everybody to kind of like think of these background issues as they think of their clients, about what set them in motion to do what they did, and what interventions could be possible in each of those levels. And all of these everything that we do is so that we can have no victims, no more victims. And, you know, it is very difficult because of what we do, that it touches us, you know, how we feel about our own sexuality, about our own sexual behavior, our own gender, our own sexual orientation. So it is the difficulty, and the exciting thing about this work is that we have to engage in such levels of self-exploration in order to also engage in that exploration with the men.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really tough.
Yeah, these are really, really difficult topics. It's no surprise that we don't see more people speaking out about them publicly. So on that very note, Alejandro Leguizamo, thank you so much for joining us today. I can't believe how quickly an hour flies by, but I've always noticed this about you. And I'm seeing you're getting a lot of high marks and requests for a more in-depth session on this topic. So I'll get back to you on that. And
all right.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you the next time. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.